Hey, if you are willing and if you are able, will you please stand for the reading of God's word this morning from Luke chapter 12, verses 22 through 38. This is right after Jesus has shared the parable of the rich fool. And he says, then turning to his disciples, Jesus said, that is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food to eat or enough clothes to wear. For life is more than food, and your body more than clothing. Look at the ravens. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for God feeds them. And you are far more valuable to him than any birds. Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And if worry can't accomplish a little thing like that, what's the use of worrying over bigger things? Verse 35, be dressed and keep your lamps burning, as though you were waiting for your master to return from the wedding feast. There's that feast again. Then you will be ready to open the door and let him in. The people who are ready and waiting for him will see him. I tell you the truth, which is funny because I didn't think Jesus could tell it any other way. That translates, listen, this is important. I tell you the truth. He himself, the master, he himself will seat them, the servants, put on an apron and serve them as they sit and eat. He may come in the middle of the night or just before dawn, but whenever he comes, he will reward the servants who are ready. Now may God add his blessing to our reading of his word. You may be seated. We see again the master serving the people who serve him. And because they're willing and because they're awake and because they're ready to let him in, then they get to receive this beautiful gift that the master has for them. Christianity is about being aware of what we don't easily see unless we are looking. Christianity is about awakening the eyes and the ears and the heart so that you can see what's always happening right in front of you, if you choose to see it for what it is. The message of Jesus is often called vigilance, seeing, or being awake. It must be really important because in Mark chapter 14, this is the Garden of Gethsemane. Almost the last thing that Jesus says to his disciples, 2 words, stay awake. Stay awake. That's our sermon title this morning, Stay Awake. Awake to what? The presence of Christ. Stay awake to the presence of Christ. Number 1, if you're taking notes, we are always in God's presence. We are always in God's presence. The people, Luke 12:37, we just read it. The people who are ready and waiting for him will see him. Seems simple, but it's true. Who are the people that are going to see him? Who are the people that are going to receive the gift from this master who wants to come and to serve and to love his servants? The people who are ready and the people who are waiting to see him. Many times people tell me that they would like to know God better, but they can't seem to find him in their everyday lives. We all know what that's like. There's no judgment on that. But what's absent is not the presence of God, but the person's awareness of the presence of God. God is not elsewhere. God has not left us. God has not abandoned us. God is, right? God is present always. But we're not always awake to the presence of God in our lives. 3 times in the garden, Jesus asks his friends to stay present with him. Think about that. He's about to go through the most agony, the most suffering for the life of the world. He's about to do this. And he asks his closest friends, his disciples, he asks them, will you come and will you stay awake? Will you come and be with me? We see it here 3 different times in the garden. Verse 38 from Matthew 26, he says, stay here and keep watch with me. Verse 41, watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. Well, what's the temptation? Watch and pray so that you will not fall asleep to the presence of God, of Jesus. And then finally, the 3rd time, he just says, are you still sleeping? Like, are you still sleeping? It's really essential to realize that even though we may not know it, God is maintaining us with every breath that we take. With each breath we take in and out, God is choosing us. He's choosing us now, and now, and now. We are always in the process of waking up to the presence of God. Amen. Are we awake this morning? I have preached to a lot of sleeping people, literally. My first job was to preach the Sunday night service to a bunch of retired people in Florida. No joke, there were 300 of them there that would show up on a Sunday night. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Pastor Don, thank you. He said, I want you to preach every Sunday night, young man. And I drove over there, and I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating when I say only about 20% of them were awake. You just put the microphone in monitor just to wake them up every once in a while, you know. I did. I really did that a couple times. I guess I am funny. Where was I? We are always in the process of waking up to the presence of God. This is so beautiful in this first reading that we had. He says, at first glance, it really sounds like your hippie aunt, right? She's like, hey, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about the food. Don't worry about the clothes. Just don't worry about it. Look at the birds. I mean, God takes care of the birds. He takes care of the flowers. He's going to take care of you too. Don't worry about it. Well, that freaks me out. But Jesus is not our hippie aunt. Actually, he's Jesus, and he's telling his disciples how they're going to live life once he's gone, and how they're going to experience the kingdom of heaven that's present and at hand to them, even when he's not physically present anymore. And so he says, listen, when you start to worry about not having enough food, remember, you're still alive. Stop, take a breath, and remember, hey, I know I'm hungry, and I don't know where my next meal is coming from. But you'll experience my presence when you say, okay, I'm still alive. And isn't your body more than clothing? When you begin to worry about the clothes that you have, stop, step back, and remember, I've been freely given a body with which to put clothes on. It's not just a carefree thing. It's hey, these are things that are going to happen. You're going to get worried about the very basic, essential things of life. And here's how you keep the perspective. And here's how you find me in the midst of hunger, in the midst of not being clothed. You step back and you realize I'm still alive and I still have a body and God is still present. That's good. We are always in the process of waking up to the presence of God. I had a friend named Mike in Dallas, and Mike had this job that he couldn't ever talk about, but he would give me kind of like for instances. And he had the most interesting job. I met him on the golf course, and we would go and we would play sometimes, and sometimes we would go out and grab dinner afterwards. And his job was so fascinating. He worked for really wealthy or really famous people, and he was basically an adult babysitter. No joke. He was on call 24/7. Mike would get the phone call. He would fly out that night to LA, to Washington, to wherever, and he would meet this person and he would escort them. He would be present with them from where they were all the way to rehab, to walking in the front door in the safety of their rehab facility. And then when they got out of rehab, for as long as it took, he would be their sober companion. He would go to all their events with them. He would go to everything with them, and he would just be present to them and help them, get back into the routine of their daily lives. He's an adult babysitter. And I just thought this was so fascinating because he could never use names, but he would tell me stories, and they were crazy stories. But I said one time, I said, Mike, what is it about your job that you love so much? Because it's a very taxing job. It's not an easy job. He said, I get to see people wake up. I get to be there in the moment when they wake up. I'll never forget that. Are we in the business of helping people see the presence of God that's all around us and helping them wake up and become present to that? I mean, isn't that the gospel? Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that what we're called to do? We don't have to just sit on a mountain and wait for the second coming of Christ. The transformation is here and right now. And our job right now is to take seriously Christ in the here and now and share that awakening with everyone that we meet. We experience God in every moment that we are present to his presence and to his provision with our minds and our hearts and with our eyes and with our ears. Jesus says, whoever has ears, listen. Like if you've got them, use them. The great prophet says, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the grave and let your light shine. Some of us need to wake up. Number 2, how do we stay awake? All right, Pastor, we need to wake up. We see that we can be awake to the presence of God in our lives. Well, how do we stay awake? Luke 12:35, we read it, be dressed and keep your lamps burning. Don't let the oil run out. In other words, keep paying attention. Keep being present. How do you stay awake? By attending to the things that are important. Well, Pastor, I lost my job. Okay. How long before you lost your job did you stop paying attention to the details that were required in your job? Well, my wife and I are going through a really, really tough time. Okay. I understand that. Let's go back. How long ago was it that you stopped paying attention to the specific detailed needs and caring about one another and being present to one another in that way that you were in the beginning? Are you with me? If we're supposed to wake up, great, but how do we stay awake? We stay awake by paying attention to the lamp that needs to continue burning. Don't let the oil run out. Now that we know this, how do we do it? How do we stay awake? We stay awake by remaining in the present, knowing that it is our present that determines our future, not our worrying about the present or our anxiousness about the present, but our willingness to deal with the now, to be in reality and always that is present in each moment. What does that mean? I love to do this every once in a while with my 6-year-old. The other day we were having fun in the yard and he was running around in the hose, and I made this makeshift slip and slide. just from some tarp I bought at Home Depot. And I mean, it's awful. I wasn't going to try it, but he loved it. It was the coolest thing ever for him. What's that called? Visqueen? You know, it's like $12. Visqueen and Dawn soap. And just stake it into the ground and run the hose. And 6-year-old dream. In the middle of it somewhere, Amber was out there with me holding the baby. The sun was shining. And Houston was getting a little tired. And I said, hey, bud, do me a favor. Take a breath. I said, crisscross applesauce. How many of you know what that is? That's kindergarten speak for cross your legs and sit on the ground. Crisscross applesauce. I love it. So he crosses his legs and he sits down on the grass. I said, take a minute, take a deep breath. I said, close your eyes, bud. He closed his eyes. I said, what do you hear? He said, I hear the birds. I said, how many of them? He said, I don't know. There's so many. His eyes are still closed. I said, what do you feel? He said, I feel the grass. It's wet. I said, what else do you feel? He said, I feel the sun. It's hot. Amber and I are looking at each other at this point. I said, Houston, what are you afraid of? He said, nothing. I said, what are you worried about? He said, nothing. Nothing? There's nothing you're worried about right now? He said, no. What? No. Like, okay. You want to play some more? Yeah. Okay, get up. Let's go. I think those are the questions Jesus asked a little kid when he said, hey, send the little children unto me. And then he looks at the adults. He looks at all of us who fill our moments with anxiety and with worry and with fear. And he looks at them and he says, unless you come to me like this little child, unless you come like this, you will never be able to experience the kingdom of heaven. And these are the words of Jesus. He wasn't joking. My kid's not any different than the other kids or the way we were when we were kids. We naturally understood this. But somewhere along the way, we begin to fill our lives with worry about the present, with anxiousness about the present, with worry about the future, and we start to lose track of the here and now, and ultimately, what's most important, the presence of God that is with us in the here and the now. Are you with me? This isn't something that we have to go out and find. It's something that's within each and every one of us if we simply will just sit still, be quiet, and know that he's God and that he's with us. Just paying attention to the things that are around us, his presence in them. This is similar to what Jesus was conveying to Thomas in John chapter 20. You know, oh, doubting Thomas, right? He's struggling with Christ being incarnate, like none of us have ever done that. He's resurrected from the dead. He thought presence with Christ was no longer possible. And then in John chapter 20, here's Jesus. Hey, Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out. Put your hand into my side. Jesus was saying, be alert. Recognize what is in your sight now. And then what was incomprehensible to you before will become clear to you as you become aware of me. Sometimes we need to unplug from the 1,000 distractions and demands that keep us not here or render us only half here because of our anxiety. I like to say, you know, you're here, you might as well be here. I mean, you're there. You might as well be there. But how often are we just really, we're present, like we're physically there, but we're not there. Like the disciples were with Jesus. He's like, my soul is in agony. He's crying tears of blood, and the only thing he asks is that they'll just stay awake. Will you just be here? And they can't do it. Sometimes we need to unplug from the distractions and the things that keep us only half here in anxiety. We tend to choose one of two options when we are in our own garden of anxiety. We all know this, but it's fun to remember. Our brain sends us this fight or flight signal to our body, and we either come out swinging or we duck and we look for cover. And you'll know which one you are, or which your first go-to is, if you guys like to scare each other around the house, right? There's some people, like my dad, that when I would jump out around the corner, I had to duck because he was going to swing. I mean, you're going to scare him in a dark hallway, get ready, right? But my mom, she's just going to scream and lay down, right? Just flight. These are natural things. Fight, flight, and they take over whenever we're not present to what's really happening around us. We choose one of those two options. We do that when we're not awake, when we're unconscious. Think about that for a minute. It's a basic primal survival instinct, and many of us are constantly and continuously living in that place. We can't place judgment on it. It happens. It's a reflex. We see it with the apostles in the garden. The apostles were under intense pressure. Peter stood up and began to fight, and then he ran. And then all of the disciples, all of his best friends, they all ran away. They scattered. It's easy to judge them unfairly, but realistically, this is how we all respond when we are not conscious of how our holy source of security is present to us. I think at times like that, the best thing to do is to stop and to breathe and to pay attention. Stop. Breathe. Pay attention. What's more important, the clothes or your body? What's more important, the food in the pantry or the life that you have right now in this moment? And it's not just like one of those things that every lady has experienced where you open up your closet and there's 500 things and you go, oh, I can't find anything that fits. I have nothing to wear. There's a third way. There's another way that doesn't fill us with anxiety and that doesn't create this fear response. And it's to stay awake to what really matters. To step back and say, what's really important here? Jesus is setting that prescription out for us in these verses. The most beautiful thing about our mind, I love this, is that we're able to change it. Did you know that? Did you know that you can change your mind? Amen. Young or old, you're free to change your mind. We all have certain tools that we use in order to stay awake. For me, I try to push the reset button because I know that there's all these other programs that are running in the background, and I'm probably reacting to most of those and not just that one thing that I'm actually dealing with in that moment. There's all these other programs running around in the background. Have you ever seen, so there's this new show out called Atlanta, and I'm not recommending it, but it's funny. And there's one episode where they talk about this archetype, like this actual scary monster that lives in Florida, and his name is Florida Man. Because this guy's going to Florida, and he's like, watch out for Florida Man. He's like, who's Florida Man? He's like, I don't know, but I read about him in the paper all the time, right? Florida Man gets high on meth, and his leg gets chewed off, swimming in the lake at 2 o'clock in the morning. Florida Man rides horse into Walmart, you know? This is a real headline from when I lived in Florida. Florida Man kills wife over spilled orange juice. Let me tell you, it wasn't about spilled orange juice. But we can get so wrapped up in our anxiety, in our fear, in all of these things that we just keep pushing down and refusing to see the bigger picture, refusing to stay awake to the presence of God that's with us, that we can become irrational and crazy if we're not careful. Is this okay? 1 John 2:21, he says, I do not write to you because you do not know the truth, but because you already know it. You already know this. So here's the goal. Neither fighting or fleeing, but simply believing in the power of what you already know. Seeing the beauty in what is happening now. Being with it. In the middle of it. With God. He's there too. And seeing it all the way through. This is how we live a waking life. We don't come to God or truth or love by insisting on perfection. That's not how it works. But in fact, we come to staying awake by the experience of forgiveness. The forgiveness of reality. Yeah, that's a thing. Some of us need to forgive our own realities. We need to accept it first. But then we need to forgive it. We need to forgive others. We need to forgive ourselves. In the garden, Jesus gave a lot of compassion to his friends because of their humanity. He acknowledged that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And he said, the hour has come, but go ahead and sleep if you need to. He knew it was too much for them at the time, so he did it for them. And that's really okay. It's very comforting. Awake or asleep, he is always there. It's about who he is and not what we do. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do when we don't know what else to do is to sleep. You'll wake up at exactly the right time. One of the first steps to being able to staying awake to ourselves and to each other when we slept through the important things because we are fragile and it was too much for us at the time. One of the first steps to being able to stay awake is to forgive ourselves and each other when we slept through the important things because we were fragile and it was too much for us at the time. You know the times. The times when you fell asleep when someone else needed you. The times when someone else fell asleep when you needed them. It's important to forgive this because we come to the knowledge of truth through that forgiveness. We forgive human frailty and embrace the extraordinary bigness of God. We put our hope in him and not in anyone else. That's the way we find peace, and that's the way we stay awake. As we come to the table and as our act of worship, there might be some people in here who'd say, I'm ready to forgive that person who fell asleep when I needed them the most. I'm ready to forgive myself for falling asleep because it was too much, for not being present. Or maybe you say, I want to experience what it means to be awake to the presence of God in my everyday, ordinary, beautiful, holy life, just the way it is. Wherever you find yourself this morning, as the ushers come, or as the elders come forward and they're here to pray, and as we take communion, be conscious and aware of that. This is a beautiful time to make a really important decision that can transform your life. So, on the night before Christ was betrayed, he gathered around the table with his dearest friends who were about to fall asleep on him. And he took the bread and he broke it and he gave it to them and he said, take this and eat. This is my body. Likewise, he took the cup of blessing, it was poured out for the healing of the world, and he said, take this and drink. This is my blood. this master at the end of his life serving his servants. Every time you come together, he says, and you eat this and you drink, will you remember me? So here we are, 2,000 years later, brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, and we come to the table and we eat and we drink and we remember what Christ has done for us. Not only do we eat and drink and remember, but in doing so, we celebrate that which is the very mystery of our faith, that Christ has died and that Christ has risen and that Christ will come again. So, as Jesus Christ has taught us, may we now all be so bold as to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.